Night shifts are supposed to be quiet, almost boring, but what happens when the silence hides something far more sinister? From a rideshare passenger who never leaves, to ghostly whispers in an abandoned warehouse, a call center with untraceable voices, a motel guest who checks in but never out, and a hospital basement that holds more than just old memories. These are 5 unnerving stories of being truly alone at night. It's not the silence that gets to you when you're working the graveyard shift. It's the sounds you can't explain. When I took the job as a night guard at the old Granite Bay warehouse, I didn't think much of it. The pay was decent, the hours were quiet, and I figured the biggest threats would be raccoons or a broken lock. They handed me a flashlight, a set of keys, and a map of the place. "Just do your rounds," the manager said, his voice clipped and impersonal. "Make sure no one breaks in." The warehouse was huge, rows of rusted shelves stretching into the dark, crates and machinery gathering dust from decades of disuse. The place reeked of oil and mildew. It was the kind of place where the shadows seemed a little too thick, where the silence wrapped around you like a second skin. The first few nights were uneventful. I'd walk the aisles, jot notes in my logbook, and listen to the hum of the old fluorescent lights, but by the third night, things started to feel off. It began with faint whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind slipping through a cracked window, or the creaks of the building settling. But these whispers were different, low, indistinct, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. I'd stop and shine my flashlight around, calling out, "Hello? Anyone there?" But there was never an answer. One night, as I walked past the east wing, I heard footsteps echo behind me. Not the steady, hollow clang of my own boots, but quick, skittering taps. I spun around, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The aisle was empty. I radioed the on-call supervisor. "Hey, I think there's someone in here. I'm hearing, I don't know, noises." "Probably rats," came the lazy reply. "Big place like that, they're everywhere." I wanted to believe him. I really did. By the 5th night, I'd started keeping the lights on in every section I patrolled. It didn't help much. The whispers were louder now, the footsteps more frequent. The building seemed to breathe, the air thick with something I couldn't name. That's when I found the records. In the back office, buried under a pile of old invoices, I came across a folder marked Personnel, Incident Reports. I wasn't supposed to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were files on workers who had gone missing, 4 of them, all within a 3-year span in the late 80s. Each case was marked unresolved. The details made my stomach turn. One report mentioned a worker who'd vanished during a night shift, his equipment found scattered near the break room. Another described tools lying in odd, almost ritualistic patterns. None of them were ever found. I couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't be there. That night, things escalated. The whispers turned into faint, chilling laughter, echoing from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. One of the overhead lights began to flicker, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. My flashlight started to dim, despite fresh batteries, and then I saw it. As I turned a corner, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure just at the edge of the light. It was tall and shadowy, its features obscured, but it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to steady my voice. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring, or at least I thought it was staring. I took a step forward, and it melted into the darkness. By the time I reached the break room, my nerves were shot. I was ready to call it a night, maybe even quit altogether. But as I stepped inside, I froze. The room was eerily intact, unlike the rest of the warehouse. A single chair sat in the center, and on the far wall hung a cracked, full-length mirror. My flashlight wavered as I scanned the room. That's when I noticed it. My reflection. It wasn't moving. I blinked, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me, but my reflection just stood there, staring back at me with a vacant expression. Its head tilted slightly, and then its lips curled into a slow, unnatural grin. I dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly across the floor. When I looked back, my reflection had stepped out of the mirror. It was me, but it wasn't. Its eyes were too wide, its movements jerky and inhuman. It took a step toward me, and I stumbled backward, slamming into the doorframe. "I don't belong here," it said, its voice a distorted mimicry of mine. "But you do." I don't remember much after that. Somehow, I made it out of the warehouse, my heart pounding like a drum. I called the manager the next morning and told him I was done. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone more annoyed than concerned. "Can't handle a few rats?" I didn't bother explaining. It's been 2 weeks since I left the job. I've been trying to move on, but every now and then I catch something out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing outside my window. It's there for only a second, but I know what I'm seeing. It's my reflection, and it's getting closer. Hosting a midnight radio show is a lonely gig, until someone calls in with a story that feels a little too real. Working the graveyard shift at WXMR 104.7 wasn't exactly glamorous, but it suited me. It was just me, a soundboard, and the occasional trucker or insomniac caller looking to chat. The station was small, a crumbling building tucked between an auto shop and an abandoned diner. By midnight, the whole place was mine. It was usually a predictable routine: play the same classic rock hits, field the odd call, and kill time until sunrise. But one night, something broke the monotony. Something I still can't explain. It started with a call. "WXMR, you're on the air," I said, leaning into the mic. There was a pause, followed by a soft, uneven breath. "Help me," a man's voice rasped. My first thought was a prank. Late-night radio tends to attract weirdos. "Sir, if this is an emergency, you should call 911. No cops," he stammered. "I'm trapped. I'm in the building." That got my attention. "You're saying you're in the station?" "Yes." His voice was shaky, like he was trying not to cry. "I'm in the basement. I've been here so long. Please, help me." The line went dead before I could respond. The station didn't have a basement, at least not one I'd ever seen. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the lobby, glancing at the dusty blueprints framed on the wall. No basement, just the studio, the offices, and the storage room. I chalked it up to a hoax, but something about the call stuck with me. The desperation in his voice felt too real. As I headed back to the studio, I heard it, a faint melody drifting through the halls. It sounded like an old piano tune, the kind you'd hear in a smoky lounge decades ago. The problem was, there wasn't a piano in the building. I followed the sound, which led me to the storage room. The door was slightly ajar, the old metal hinges groaning as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold, far colder than it should have been, and the smell of mildew was overwhelming. The room was crammed with old equipment, broken chairs, and forgotten files. The piano music grew louder, but it wasn't coming from any visible source. Instead, it seemed to seep from the walls, wrapping around me like a fog. Then I noticed the laughter, soft, distant giggles, like children playing hide and seek. They echoed faintly just beyond the range of my flashlight. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just my imagination. The job made you jumpy sometimes. Back in the studio, I decided to check the security footage. The station had a few cameras, mainly to deter vandals, and I figured I'd spot whoever was messing with me. But when I pulled up the feed, my stomach dropped. There I was, walking through the storage room, flashlight in hand. But then the screen glitched, static rippling across the monitor. When the image returned, I was standing in the break room, except I hadn't been there. The footage showed me pacing back and forth, mumbling something I couldn't make out. Then I froze, staring directly at the camera. My eyes looked different, hollow, empty. The screen glitched again, and the feed returned to normal. I was shaken, but determined to figure out what was going on. Maybe there really was someone in the building. Maybe they'd hacked the cameras somehow. I searched every inch of the station, but I didn't find anyone. Just more of that eerie music, always coming from somewhere just out of reach. And then I found the door. It was hidden behind a row of filing cabinets in the storage room. A heavy, rusted metal door I'd never seen before. My flashlight beam flickered as I reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase, spiraling down into the dark. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to lock the door, and pretend I never saw it. But I couldn't shake the caller's voice. The air grew colder as I descended, the steps groaning under my weight. At the bottom, I found a small, windowless room lined with shelves. On the shelves were dozens of cassette tapes, each labeled with a date. I picked one at random, March 3rd, 1993. Sliding it into an old tape player, I pressed play. Static crackled, followed by a familiar voice, mine. "UXMR, you're on the air," my recorded voice said. Then came the caller. "Help me," he pleaded, his words identical to the ones I'd heard earlier that night. I yanked the tape out and grabbed another. August 12th, 1979. Again, it was me, having the same conversation with the same desperate caller. The tapes didn't make sense. I wasn't even alive in 1979, let alone hosting a radio show. As I backed toward the stairs, I felt it, a presence, heavy and oppressive. My flashlight flickered, and in its dying beam, I saw shadows moving along the walls. The door at the top of the stairs slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. The music started again, louder now, mingling with the sound of laughter. I ran, stumbling up the stairs and throwing myself against the door. It wouldn't budge, and then I heard it, the voice right behind me. "Don't leave," it whispered. "Stay with us." I don't remember how I got out. One moment I was trapped, the next I was in the parking lot, gasping for air. The station loomed behind me, silent and dark. I quit the next day. I didn't give an explanation, and they didn't ask for one. It's been months since that night, but the tapes won't leave me alone. They've started appearing in places they shouldn't. In my car, on my kitchen counter, even on my nightstand. Each time, there's a new entry, a new call, a new voice, and always, without fail, my voice answering, "WXMR, you're on the air." Cleaning an old hospital at night, you get used to creaks and groans until the building starts making noises it shouldn't. Working nights as a janitor at Greenfield Memorial was quiet, but not peaceful. Hospitals never truly sleep. Even with most of the wings empty, the building seemed alive. The hum of fluorescent lights, the occasional beep from a forgotten monitor, and the distant groan of old pipes were constant companions. For months, my job had been uneventful, scrubbing floors, emptying bins, restocking supplies. I'd developed a rhythm, a routine that kept the long hours from dragging. But one night, that routine broke. It started with the key. I was in the supply closet, counting boxes of gloves and gauze, when I noticed it. A small brass key lying on a shelf that should have been empty. It was old, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see anymore, with intricate engravings etched into the bow. At first I thought it had been left there by mistake, maybe maintenance had misplaced it, but when I asked around the next day, no one claimed it. "We don't use keys like that anymore," one of the nurses said, shrugging. "Everything's on electronic locks now." Curious, I pocketed it. I tried it on a few doors during my shift, but it didn't fit any of them. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was important, that it was meant for me. That night, I dreamed of the key. In the dream, it was glowing faintly, leading me down a dark hallway. I couldn't see where it was taking me, but I could hear the sound of wheels, like a gurney being pushed slowly behind me. I woke up in a cold sweat, the faint metallic smell of the key lingering in my nostrils. Things started to change after that. Doors I knew I'd locked would be open when I returned. Once, I found the surgical suite door wide open, its sterile lights flickering. That door had been sealed for years, long before I started working there. Shadowy figures began to appear in the reflective surfaces of the hospital. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. A fleeting shape in the glass of a supply cabinet, a faint outline in the mirror above a sink. But they weren't just reflections. They moved when I didn't, their heads tilting to watch me as I passed. And then there were the sounds. At first, it was the familiar squeak of gurney wheels echoing faintly down the halls. But soon, other noises joined in, soft whispers, laughter that didn't belong to any living person, and the rhythmic thud of footsteps pacing in empty rooms. One night, while mopping near the West Wing, I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was too dark to make out any details, but it felt wrong. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me. When I shone my flashlight on it, the beam passed through as if it weren't there. The key began to weigh heavier in my pocket, literally. It felt colder, heavier, almost alive. I tried leaving it at home, but every night it would reappear in my pocket when I clocked in. One night, as I was finishing up my shift, I heard a loud clunk echo from the north wing, a part of the hospital that had been closed off for over a decade. It was the sound of a door unlocking. Heart pounding, I followed the noise, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The air grew colder as I approached the source. At the end of the hallway was a door I'd never seen before. It was old, wooden and weathered, standing out starkly against the sterile white walls. The brass key was already in the lock. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to walk away. But something compelled me forward. Slowly, I turned the key and pushed the door open. The room was like stepping into another era. Dusty shelves lined the walls, filled with rusted medical equipment, syringes, bone saws, cracked glass jars filled with unidentifiable substances. Faded black and white photographs hung haphazardly, showing hospital staff from decades past. In the center of the room was a single gurney. The sheets covering it were yellowed with age, but I could see the outline of a figure beneath them. My throat tightened as I approached, the air growing heavier with each step. When I pulled back the sheet, I nearly collapsed. It was me, or at least it looked like me, a lifeless, pale version of myself, dressed in the same uniform I was wearing. The eyes were closed, the skin waxy and cold, but the face was unmistakable. The gurney's wheels squeaked, and the figure's eyes snapped open. I stumbled back, tripping over a shelf and sending glass jars crashing to the floor. The figure sat up slowly, its movements stiff and unnatural. It turned its head toward me, its lips curling into a smile. "Thank you for finding me," it said, its voice a perfect mimic of mine. I didn't stay to hear what else it had to say. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. The next day, I threw the key into the incinerator, watching it glow red hot before disintegrating into ash. I felt a brief sense of relief, believing the nightmare was over. But that night, as I opened my locker to grab my things, the key was there, lying on top of my jacket. This time, it was different. The brass was polished, gleaming like it was brand new, and etched into the bow was my name. I quit the next day. I still dream about that room, about the gurney, about the other me sitting up and smiling with those cold, dead eyes, and no matter where I go, the key always finds its way back to me. I always thought working at a 24-hour gas station would be boring until I met the man who never left. Working the graveyard shift at a gas station isn't exactly thrilling. Most nights, I'd kill time by restocking shelves, flipping through magazines, or scrolling on my phone. Sure, we'd get the occasional odd customer, drunks, truckers, and insomniacs, but for the most part, it was quiet. Until he showed up. It was a little after midnight when I first noticed him, a man in a tattered coat and a wide-brimmed hat, standing at the edge of the parking lot. He didn't come inside or pump gas. He just stood there, perfectly still, staring at the store. At first, I figured he was just some weirdo passing through. But when I glanced up an hour later, he was still there, in the exact same spot. I decided to step outside and check on him. "Hey, you all right?" I called. He didn't respond. The way he stood there, motionless, gave me the creeps. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. When I looked back, he was gone. I didn't think much of it at the time, but that was just the beginning. The next night, he was back. Same tattered coat, same blank stare. Only this time, he was standing closer, just a few feet from the entrance. I decided to confront him. Opening the door slightly, I asked, "Can I help you with something?" He tilted his head slightly, his eyes unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "It's coming," he said, his voice low and raspy. "What's coming?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the edge of the lot, disappearing into the darkness. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling he left behind. The following night, things got stranger. I was stocking drinks in the cooler when the lights flickered. At first, I thought it was just the old wiring acting up. It happened occasionally, but then I heard it, the sound of footsteps in the store. "Hello?" I called out, stepping out of the cooler. No one was there. The air felt heavier, the silence pressing in on me. As I returned to the register, I noticed something off. The candy bars I'd just restocked were scattered across the floor. I could have sworn they were fine a minute ago. Then the lights flickered again, and I saw him. He was standing just outside the glass door, staring in at me. I locked the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want?" I shouted through the glass. He didn't respond, but he smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that made my skin crawl. The air outside seemed to shift, and a dense fog began to roll in, swallowing the parking lot and everything beyond it. The man was barely visible through the haze, but his eyes never left mine. And then he was inside. I don't know how he got in. One moment he was outside. The next, he was standing at the far end of the store, near the coffee machine. "Stay back," I said, grabbing the closest thing to a weapon, a metal flashlight. He didn't move. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed toward the back of the store. "What's back there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "It's been waiting for you," he said cryptically. "It always has." Against my better judgment, I followed him. He moved slowly, almost gliding, until we reached the storage room. I'd been in that room 100 times before, but tonight it was different. The air was colder, and the smell of damp earth was overpowering. At the center of the floor was a trapdoor I'd never seen before. The man stopped and gestured to the door. "Open it," he said. "No way," I shot back. From below, I heard muffled sounds, faint, anguished cries, like someone pleading for help. "Do you hear them?" the man asked. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. "They've been waiting for a long time," he replied. "But they don't want me. They want you." I shook my head, backing away. "I'm not opening that thing." The man's smile faded. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice echoing in a way that didn't seem natural. The trapdoor began to rattle, the cries growing louder. I felt something pulling me toward it, an invisible force drawing me closer. Panicked, I grabbed a heavy shelf and shoved it over the door. The noise stopped instantly, the room plunging into an eerie silence. When I turned around, the man was gone. The fog lifted as I walked back to the front of the store, my hands trembling. The parking lot was empty again, as if nothing had happened. I spent the rest of my shift on edge, jumping at every little sound. When morning came, I told my manager about the trapdoor, but when we checked the storage room, it was gone. There was no sign of it, no marks on the floor, nothing. I quit the job a week later, but the screams haven't left me. They follow me into my dreams, echoing in the dark corners of my mind. Sometimes, when I wake up, I swear I can hear the faint sound of footsteps outside my window. Hospitals are supposed to save lives, but on the night I got trapped in the basement, I learned they don't always succeed. It started as a normal shift, or as normal as things ever got during the graveyard hours at St. Mark's General. I was a janitor, and though I didn't love the job, it paid the bills. The nights were usually quiet. Most patients were asleep, and the staff kept to themselves, leaving me to mop the floors and take care of whatever messes the day shift left behind. Around midnight, I was mopping the main lobby when my radio crackled to life. "Jason, you there?" It was Frank, my supervisor. "Yeah, I'm here," I replied, leaning on the mop handle. "Need you to head down to the old basement wing," he said. "Some contractors left debris all over the place. Got to clear it before the morning." I paused. The basement was the one place in the hospital I actively avoided. No one liked going down there. It hadn't been used in decades, ever since they built the new wings and moved everything important upstairs. Rumor had it the basement was where they'd kept patients during an epidemic back in the 50s. Some kind of outbreak, though no one seemed to know exactly what. The old-timers whispered about it. How dozens of people died down there. How the doctors sealed it off to stop the spread. It didn't help that the basement looked like something out of a horror movie. Dim lighting, peeling paint, and endless, echoing hallways. I'd only been down there once, on my first week, and even then, I'd felt like I was being watched. "Can't it wait?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Come on, Jason," Frank said. "Just do it, all right? It's not going to clean itself." With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and broom. "All right, I'm on it." I took the service elevator down. The ride was slow and jerky, every creak and groan of the old cables putting me more on edge. When the doors finally slid open, a rush of cold air greeted me, carrying the faint scent of mildew and something metallic, like blood. The hallway stretched out before me, long and dimly lit. The fluorescents buzzed overhead, flickering erratically. My flashlight beam danced across the cracked tile floor, catching glimpses of rusted gurneys and stacks of broken furniture pushed against the walls. I told myself to focus, just find the debris, clean it up, and get out. The further I walked, the quieter it got. Upstairs, you could always hear the hum of machines, the murmur of voices, or the occasional beeping of monitors. Down here, there was nothing, just the sound of my boots echoing against the walls. Halfway down the hall, I heard it, a soft, muffled sobbing. I froze, my grip tightening on the flashlight. It was faint, almost too faint to hear, but it was there, coming from somewhere ahead of me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice bouncing off the walls. The sobbing stopped. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, straining to hear anything else. When nothing happened, I shook my head and kept walking. "It's just your imagination," I muttered under my breath. Eventually, I reached a set of double doors with faded letters spelling out "Isolation Ward." My flashlight beam revealed a chain draped across the handles, though the lock was missing. "Great," I muttered, pushing the doors open. The room beyond was massive, with rows of empty hospital beds lining the walls. Most were rusted and covered in dust, but a few looked strangely clean, as if someone had been using them. As I stepped further in, I noticed papers scattered across the floor. Curious, I bent down and picked one up. It was an old patient record, the edges brittle and yellowed with age. The writing was smudged, but the attached photograph caught my attention. It showed a woman with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, her expression blank and lifeless. Something about her face nagged at me, though I couldn't place it. I grabbed another record. This one featured a man with a sharp jawline and piercing eyes. Again, his face seemed familiar, though I couldn't figure out why. As I sifted through more records, a horrifying realization hit me. The faces in the photographs, they looked like people I worked with, nurses, doctors, even Frank. "No way," I whispered, my pulse quickening. A sudden noise made me jump, a soft creak like a footstep on old wood. My flashlight darted around the room, but I saw nothing. Then the sobbing started again, louder this time. It was coming from deeper in the ward. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my feet seemed to move on their own. I followed the sound, passing by empty beds and rusted equipment. The air grew colder with every step, my breath fogging in front of me. At the far end of the room stood an operating table. Unlike everything else, it was pristine, its metal surface gleaming under the flickering lights. But as I got closer, I saw the stains, blood, fresh, dark, and still dripping onto the floor. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. Then I heard it, a voice, low and guttural, whispering my name. "Jason!" I spun around, shining my flashlight wildly, but the room was empty. The light flickered, and for a brief second I thought I saw something, a shadowy figure standing in the corner. When the light steadied, it was gone. That was it. I wasn't sticking around to find out what was going on. I turned and bolted for the exit. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly in both directions. I sprinted toward the elevator, but when I pressed the button, nothing happened. Come on, I yelled, jamming the button over and over. Behind me, the sobbing grew louder, echoing down the hallway. Desperate, I turned toward the stairwell. The metal door creaked as I shoved it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward. "Down?" I said, my voice trembling. "That can't be right." But when I tried to go back, the door slammed shut behind me. I had no choice. Gripping the handrail, I started down the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the sobbing turned into whispers, dozens of voices murmuring just out of earshot. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw it again, the shadowy figure. It stood motionless, blocking my path. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it began to move, mimicking my every motion. When I stepped back, it stepped forward. When I raised my arm, it raised its own. My heart pounded as I realized it wasn't just copying me. It was me. Panicking, I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed. When I opened them again, I was lying on the floor of the hospital lobby. Bright lights and familiar voices surrounded me. A nurse knelt beside me, asking if I was all right. I couldn't explain what had happened. I didn't even know where to start. For weeks, I tried to forget. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I'd been overtired and stressed. But then I noticed the cut. It was small, barely a scratch, but it wouldn't heal. The skin around it grew red and tender, and when I looked closely, I saw something beneath the surface. A face. Tiny and distorted, but unmistakable. Its eyes stared back at me, and its mouth moved as if trying to speak. I haven't gone back to the hospital since, but every night I dream of that basement, of sobbing echoes, endless stairs, and the shadow that still waits for me in the dark.